So there's no room in this very, very intricate, complex production line to get from someone growing the food to then you buying it in the produce aisle. There's like maybe 2% profit margin actually going to the store on that. There's no room for error. Also, it's taken a long time to figure out how to get from the field to the produce aisle. And the one thing we know for sure is if you want someone to take over a system and absolutely screw it up into oblivion, then let the government do it. Kamala Harris she is moving and shaking. She's having huge rallies. The one thing she's not doing is sitting down in any interviews and taking any hostile questions, not hostile, like, degrading her or dressing her down, just like hostile, like, let me poke holes in your policy positions. The other thing she hasn't done much of is present policy positions. However, she has finally released her economic plans, and her economic plans, for anyone who has read any amount of history, are somewhat shocking that they could even possibly be real. Here's from the Washington Post. The most striking proposals, here's the paragraph where it finally gets specific, were for the elimination of medical debt for millions of Americans, the first ever ban on price gouging for groceries and food, a cap on prescription drug costs, a $25,000 subsidy for first-time homebuyers, and a child tax credit that would provide $6,000 per child to families for the first year of the baby's life. So let me go through that again. There would be elimination of medical debt for millions of Americans. So that's probably hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars. And remember, when you erase debt, it does not just disappear, right? Someone has to pay for that. Like the debt is owed. So you can't just wipe it off of a ledger. This isn't magic. Like the economy isn't magic. It's not run on wishes. It's not run on fairy dust. Okay.
Wow.
The money will come from something at some point, right? So elimination of medical debt, probably in the billions of dollars. The first ever ban on price gouging for groceries. So this is price fixing, and on groceries, specifically groceries and food, which typically have a profit margin of about 1 to 2%. So, in a really great business model, you have like 20% profit margins. The tech industry boomed so much because they would have like 80% profit margins on some things, but 1 to 2%. So there's no room in this very, very intricate, complex production line to get from someone growing the food to then you buying it in the produce aisle. There's like maybe 2% profit margin actually going to the store on that. There's no room for error. Also, it's taken a long time to figure out how to get from the field to the produce aisle. And the one thing we know for sure is if you want someone to take over a system and absolutely screw it up into oblivion, then let the government do it. So they're going to take it over. They're going to fix these prices, price gouging. And this is like, they have just parachuted so much money into the economy. They have just like t-shirt cannon at an NBA game money all throughout the country. And that you'll never guess, that leads to inflation. So then, because of inflation, the prices have to go up. And so the people who just rocket launched money into the economy, causing the inflation, are now looking at grocery stores who have a 2% profit margin and are going to make them lower their costs and get up on stage at rallies and go, prices are just too high. I mean, how did this even happen? I don't know why prices are so high, but you know what? We're going to make the people who are suffering from it now have to lower their costs and probably bankrupt their industry. Vote for me.
Wow.
Elimination of medical debt, billions of dollars. First ever ban on price gouging for groceries and food. A cap on prescription drug costs. Now, I don't like price fixing because I've read a history book.
Wow.
But there are real problems with big pharma. So let's not pretend that's not. This is the least intellectual way to go about this. There's a reality that we are like the only country who doesn't really negotiate for our prescription drug costs. And maybe you know the reasons for that, and you can tell me in the comments. So everyone else gets their prescription drugs way cheaper, and then we pay the brunt of it, right? This is the same thing that was happening with a lot of the security things like NATO. You know, we were paying the bulk of it. And so we could just negotiate some of these things and lower the costs without having to take these more totalitarian, communistic price fixing measures. A $25,000 subsidy for first-time home buyers, which everyone has rightly pointed out, any realtor worth their salt, if you've ever sold a home, the question they're going to ask is, how much can I possibly get for this home? This home was an investment. I spent a lot of money in it. I did a lot of upkeep. I did a lot of renovation. I want to get the maximum dollar amount I can when I sell this home. And now you're just going to go, well, let's put it $25,000 higher, because some percentage of buyers are going to come in and just get that $25,000 anyway. And then a child tax credit that would provide $6,000 per child to families for the first year of a baby's life. This one, again, if we weren't already just absolutely fire hosing money onto every plane of America, then sure, you know, I like the idea, and you've seen this done well in some other countries. I believe in Honduras, where they are very actively incentivizing people to have children. The reality is America is below replacement rate. And so people run on incentives. If this is an incentive that helps with that issue, then maybe we could have that conversation. The problem is it comes on the back of so much other money, more money coming in, debts being wiped out, right? And then prices being fixed. And before you think I'm just like off my rocker and, you know, crazy and the only person who doesn't think this is going to work, even CNN, who has been running coverage for the Harris-Walz campaign every second of the day, right? Talking about the joy of the campaign or whatever. Even they are like, I'm not so sure that this is a great idea. Let's take a look at this.
Catherine, I read your piece and I heard you just mention it. The federal ban on price gouging for groceries. You are skeptical of this. Why?
Well, first of all, nobody can explain what price gouging means. It's like that old line about pornography. I know it when I see it, in the sense that what does it mean to have an excessive price or an excessive profit margin? That seems to be shorthand for a price or a profit margin that bugs me. That seems too high. So, you know, it's very hard to pin down what this would actually mean. If you look at the legislation that, as I mentioned, is already in the Senate, led by Senator Warren and Senator Bob Casey and a slew of others, the particular way that this is written, which is likely to be the template for any proposal that Harris would eventually embrace, is especially bad in that it just bans excessive prices, grossly excessive profit margins, and says that the Federal Trade Commission can use any metric it deems appropriate to decide what that would mean, which basically says, like, it's not going to be markets, it's not going to be supply and demand that's determining how much your grocery store charges you for milk or for eggs. It's going to be some bureaucrat in DC, which seems like totally unworkable, first of all, for the FTC to be deciding like how much Kroger charges for eggs in Michigan. But it also would be very bad for markets. We've seen this kind of thing tried in lots of other countries before: Venezuela, Argentina, the Soviet Union, et cetera. It leads to shortages. It leads to black markets, you know, plenty of uncertainty. And beyond that, the specific way this bill is written might actually increase prices because of some of the other language in it. Things like requiring companies, public companies, to disclose in their quarterly reports, their quarterly earnings reports, how they're setting prices, which is a great way to help them collude, which normally we don't want them to do. So anyway, you know, the devil's in the details, I guess, for that bill, but it's really hard for me to imagine any form of legislation that preserves the spirit of what she's proposing that would not be, you know, at best do nothing, at worst cause a lot of harm.
Yeah. So let's look at the kind of harm that this kind of price fixing and these exact kind of monetary policies could create. This is a chart of the inflation in Venezuela. You can see that when Chavez was elected, that even his policies started creating significant. I mean, you're looking at 40% there. Then you have Maduro elected, and look at, if you're not on YouTube, come to youtube.com/Clayton Tyner. Look at this chart, Judah. Like, this chart is an anomaly in the world of charts, right? If you made a chart about charts, this chart would stand out on that chart. So like, these kind of price fixing is why people in Venezuela, so much money pumped in the economy, price fixing going on, black markets being created, collusion across the private sector. This is why people were walking around with wheelbarrows full of money, right? Because an apple was $17,000 now. The inflation went up by hundreds and hundreds of percentages. And that is the fiscal policy that we're talking about here. Like she mentioned, we saw this in the Soviet Union. We've seen this throughout history. And this is the danger of a world where we are so glued to smartphones. We are so glued to social media. We spend so much of our brain power just on narcissistic self-pursuits. The guy says, who's speaking into a camera right now, I understand, irony.
Wow.
However, you gotta read some books, read some history, because anyone who has read history should hear the words coming out of Kamala Harris's mouth about what she's going to do with an already inflationary economy and go, whatever we're going to do, it can't be that. Whatever we're going to do, it's got to be opposite, right? Because this is a recipe for absolute unmitigated disaster. And you might like all of Kamala Harris's other talking points about other things, right? You may really, and you may just really hate Donald Trump. And I get that as well. You know, he's a very brash guy. He's got a tough history. There's also been significant push from almost every direction in culture that he's the worst guy. He's Orange Hitler. He's all these things. Maybe you hate him. This is concerning. This should trouble you, right? Our first segment, which is free abortions at the DNC. If you are a Christian, that's got to bother you. If you're a Christian who is a little more progressive on the abortion issue, right? Which I think you should really search scripture, because that's just seemed like, in the political realm of things, to me, it's not a political issue. To me, it's an issue of life. It's like 10 commandments, right? It's like, is it murder, right? So, however, maybe you're like a little more progressive and you're a safe, legal, and rare kind of. This isn't safe, legal, and rare. This is one of the perks of going to the national convention. So that should be an issue. This should be an issue. Practically, pragmatically, the country we're going to live in, the country our kids and grandkids are going to inherit, whether or not we are going to be destitute, whether or not entrepreneurism is going to be able to continue, all of these things, these aren't it. And there's a reason that all throughout the Old Testament, and the Old Testament is dealing with the kingdom of Israel, right? The New Testament is the Gospels, the life of Jesus, and then it is the spread of the ecclesia, of the church, to the ends of the earth, right? So the Old Testament, we have this blueprint for God's theocratic rule, and he has in there over and over, he tells the people through prophets, through the leaders, remember, remind your children, tell your family, remember, because it is the famous adage, those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. We are doomed to walk back into cycles in our spiritual life. If we forget what God has done, if we forget what he's rescued us from, if we forget how devastating our sinful patterns were to our lives and our relationships, if we forget, we repeat, right? And we have one of our two, and if you're a Democrat, Republican, I don't care. One of our two potential future presidents is pushing the same ideas that have bankrupt and devastated countries in the past. And so we have to be aware, and we have to be paying at least a little bit of attention to what's going on around us and what's going on historically, because if we know that, then we can safeguard against repeating those same mistakes. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you are subscribed so you can stay up to date with all new content. And if you want early access, exclusive content, and monthly live Q&As, make sure to check out patreon.com/Clayton Tyner.